Welcome to the August 3rd, 2017 Murfreesboro City Council meeting. Council Member Shacklett has our prayer, but also want to recognize John and Ethan Summer are here. They're with Troop 398 at St. Mark's. They're completing their communication merit badge. And so John and Ethan are going to handle our pledge after the prayer.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I want to introduce you a couple of people that are going to do the prayer for tonight. We have started a program with our Murfreesboro Police Department, and it's been several months in kind of getting it together. But these folks have volunteered to be chaplains in our police department. And let me introduce you, Chaplain. This is Chaplain Eddie Turner and Chaplain James Tipton. And I'd ask Eddie if he would tell us a little bit about the program and then do the opening prayer for us.
Thank you. We're thrilled to be a part of the newly formed chaplaincy of the Murfreesboro Police Department. With our growing city and all the things that are taking place, we have a police department that is under a lot of pressure, both emotionally as well as physically, as you well know. And when they sent out the call to have clergy or people who are interested to come and help them in their emotional health and also in working with families impacted by crime or tragedy, there was several of us who readily answered that appeal. And we've been through several days of training. We've received instruction from the Chaplaincy Department of Metro Nashville. They came in and trained us, so we're excited about the opportunities before us, and we thank you for the opportunity. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for a wonderful city. We thank you for the opportunity to live in a city that is growing. Father, we know that not everywhere in the United States there's plenty of jobs and there's opportunities, but here in our city we're blessed. And Father, we thank you for these men and women of our leadership who take time away from their families to come and serve the constituents of this city. You said in your word, if any lacks wisdom, let him ask. So we ask for wisdom tonight for our leaders. We ask for your blessings upon them, your emotional and physical strength. And Father, we ask you to bless our community with favor, with prosperity, with protection, and with justice. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
John, Ethan, thank you. I think you've got a couple people with you. Your mom is here. And then also I see grandmothers here too. And I have to disclose their aunt works and I have worked together for many, many years. So thank y'all for coming and doing the pledge and working on your communication badge. Thank y'all very much. All right, we'll move into the consent agenda. You have several items on your consent agenda.
There's no questions. I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklett.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll move into second readings and we'll now consider for passage on second and final reading ordinance 17OZ32 to rezone an area along White Poplar Court to Planned Residential Development PRD District, Poplar Grove PRD.
Move for approval. Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklett.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now consider for passage on second and final reading ordinance 17OZ35 to rezone an area along Jackson Allen Drive and Susan Landon Drive to Planned Residential Development PRD District, the Villas at Regal Square PRD.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklett.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Abstain. We have a letter from our city attorney. Mr. Tyndall.
Mayor, that's actually from me. Just to bring us up to date to where we are on this matter, this is a zoning ordinance amendment that makes a number of changes to the residential zoning provisions, and it, including a new RS6 designation, adds some amenity and open space requirements to apartment zoning, and clarifies some townhouse-type development zonings. When it was recommended by the Planning Commission in May, Planning Commission recommended that we have a limit of 250 units on the number of apartments that could be built under RM12 and RM16. When this came to Council on first reading, Council amended that to make the maximum number of units that could be built 100 units. When it came back on second reading, which was back on July 13, prior to the consideration on second reading, Council amended it again to remove the limitation on the number of units that could be built under RM12 and RM16 in order to make sure that the ordinance was crafted properly. After those amendments, we deferred consideration of, or you deferred consideration of the ordinance until a future date. We have gone through the ordinance, made sure that the appropriate changes were made to remove that limitation on the RM12 and RM16, and so this ordinance, as amended, is now before you for second reading tonight. Be happy to answer any questions.
I would like to ask the council if you would consider one thing. After meeting with Mr. Tyndall and with the planning staff, it came to the attention that I think the intent of the council we've gone through, but MU zoning was not included in this as far as the residential element that's in MU zoning. So I think it would be appropriate to ask the Planning Commission to include MU zoning and then refer that back to the City Council.
Because there's a multifamily component to the SU.
Correct.
Anybody got any questions? Good. So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Ms. Wright?
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Thank you for getting that referred back. All right, we'll now move to new business and consider recommendations of the Assistant City Engineer regarding road development agreement with Caroline Farms and a memorandum of understanding with MTSU Miller Coliseum.
Good evening, Mayor McFarland, members of the council. I'm glad to be here tonight. I have a map pulled up for your consideration. Before we look at that, I do want to introduce to you a new staff person from the engineering department. Michelle Emerson is with us here tonight for her first council meeting. She came to us from a private consultant in Manchester, lots of experience with roads, drainage, water, and sewer for both municipal and private clients. We're excited to have her on board. Michelle, if you would, just stand and wave for just a second so the mayor and council can put a face with the name. I appreciate you funding our growing positions and growing departments, and we're glad to have Michelle on board with us. I have put a map up tonight to get you in the vicinity of the two items that are up tonight before I get into the specific discussion. And these two items are joined at the hip, so to speak, so one relies on the other, and while they're two separate items, we do, for the proposal to go forward, we do need an affirmative vote on both action items here tonight. What you see on the map in the blue is the MTSU Miller Coliseum. It's located off West Thompson Lane. In the yellow shape, you also see a property that has been developed or has been proposed as Caroline Farms. And so when we're talking about Caroline Farms, that's the property in the Miller Coliseum. And we'll flip over and pick up a image specific to the first item now. And put that on the screen for you. And again, to orient you, this is the Miller Coliseum in green, Caroline Farms in the yellow, and then this is a development that was recently approved called General's Retreat. And so the developer of Caroline Farms, represented here tonight by Stephen Dotson, proposed to annex and rezone a property
for 25 acres for 112 single-family homes as a planned residential development. That property was impacted by the major thoroughfare plan. We just set through the introduction of the 2040 major thoroughfare plan. Here's an application of how that worked. The major thoroughfare plan required Mr. Shacklett midterm improvement, so the priority was set to that, number 8, which was a connector street proposed to connect Thompson Lane to Cherry Lane to the north. And because his property was influenced by the major thoroughfare plan, his development plans needed to address the requirements of the thoroughfare plan by dedicating right-of-way and easements and in participation in the financial cost to construct that road. The zoning plan was approved with a public-private partnership that was crafted between Caroline Farms and the City of Murfreesboro, and also with the consultation with MTSU Miller Coliseum to shift slightly midterm improvement 8 into the development of Caroline Farms so that only one road would need to be constructed at that time. The master plan and preliminary plat were approved by the Planning Commission, and so now Mr. Dotson is ready to move forward with implementation of construction plans for the first phase. One of the requirements of the major thoroughfare plan that impacted the developer's roadway plans was he had to build better and higher standards for this connector road than he would have for residential standards. So the public-private partnership involves the city participating in the cost of construction of his internal street, which will eventually become a public street dedicated to the city. And we've proposed to provide 1,000 tons of base stone. We've proposed to top all streets in the subdivision when they're ready. That's the place to final asphalt coat. And then also to construct approximately 300 linear feet of sidewalk and multi-use trail that will be a part of the plan, but not specifically inside his development. We have proposed a road development agreement. The city legal department has drafted that. We've reviewed back and forth between the parties. The road development agreement was attached to the proposal item, or the agenda item, and it's envisioned that the build-out of Caroline Farms would take 3 to 4 years with construction to start perhaps later this fall. I should say, while not specifically included in tonight's items, Quarter Horse Drive, which is a street being constructed by the developer of Caroline Farms, eventually needs to be constructed to the north on property the city owns that we refer to as the Siegel Park property to Cherry Lane. That midterm improvement number 8 and engineering department is recommending that the next update to the CIP include a placeholder for that project in the 3 to 4 year time frame, and so the CIP that we'll be bringing back to you in a very near future will include a placeholder for the balance of midterm improvement 8 to make that roadway connection. It also needs to correspond to the construction of Cherry Lane. So we've got to have Caroline Farms completing on one end, Cherry Lane completing on the other end, and then a third project that would route Quarter Horse Drive to Cherry Lane proposed in the CIP. A second matter, the city's Greenway Blueway Bikeway Master Plan also included a Greenway Connector 2 traveling that same corridor, north to south from Thompson Lane to Siegel Park. The proposals you'll see tonight will include accommodations for a portion of Greenway Connector 2 along the MTSU Miller Coliseum property. The CIP that we just referred to will also be updated for a placeholder for Greenway Connector 2 so that could be constructed concurrent with Quarter Horse Drive, making that Greenway connection from Thompson Lane up to the Siegel Park area and completing an important link in our Greenway network. So the physical impact is this. The road development agreement requires the city provide 1,000 tons of base stone. It requires that we install the final asphalt topping on the street and also to construct the 300 feet of sidewalk and multi-use path. We've estimated that at $110,000, and we propose to fund that from the state street aid. while we're not specifically asking for funding tonight, we've also estimated that the balance of Quarter Horse Drive, the placeholder for the CIP will be on the order of $4.5 million, and the placeholder in the CIP for Greenway Connector 2 will be approximately $2.9 million. Again, those will be brought to you at a future date. The Planning Commission has approved the zoning plan. They've approved the master plan and the preliminary plat in previous meetings. And so staff's recommendation tonight is twofold. First, we recommend you approve the attached road development agreement and authorize the city manager to execute that on behalf of the city with any final edits that might need to be made between the legal department and the developer, subject to approval of the city attorney. Our second recommendation is to approve the source of funding and the amount of funding of $110,000 from state street aid. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions about this first proposal.
Any questions?
Where's the light going? Red light. Which of those two roads?
Mr. Lance, I think your question is, are we envisioning a traffic signal for any of the roads that are intersecting with Thompson Lane? Our current projection is that Siegel Road, with the construction of the development that's proposed and connection to Cherry Lane, Siegel Road will likely warrant a signal at the location, and I'll circle it on this exhibit that's here.
Yeah.
That's the Siegel Road, Thompson Lane intersection. We've envisioned that will be a signalized intersection at some point in the future. We also envision Leanna Road, which is approximately half a mile to the west, will be signalized with the improvements to Thompson Lane.
When we originally talked about Caroline, wasn't there going to be a light at Caroline?
If it's warranted, the spacing is adequate for us to do that.
Okay.
It is a state route, and because it's a state route, we will have to meet the state warrant analysis for a proposed signal.
If there's no more questions, I'll move for approval.
Motion second. Ms. Wright, call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance. Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Abstain. Consider recommendations of the Water Resource. Thank you, Mr. Oh, one more? Okay.
One more item, item B under this same from the Assistant City Engineer, is to consider approval of a memorandum of understanding with the MTSU Miller Coliseum. Same background. Development of Caroline Farms, shifting the major thoroughfare plan, midterm improvement 8 into Caroline Farms. This portion also addresses providing some of the right-of-way and easements needed to construct Greenway Connector 2. And so during the rezoning and plan development process for Caroline Farms, we consulted with MTSU Miller Coliseum Board, presented this proposal to them. They happily endorsed the concept of shifting the roadway away from the Coliseum. They also happily endorsed the idea of a Greenway Connector, adding an amenity to their property. What's in it for them? The city would allow them then to connect a secondary exit to this proposed road network, giving that event center access to Cherry Lane and the proposed interstate interchange on State Route 840. It also shifts the roadway further away from their horse and equestrian education facilities, the paddocks that are there. What they're asked to do in exchange, and a component of the memorandum of understanding, is to dedicate certain lands and easements which are described in documents prepared by the city attorney in exchange for donating those properties and easements to the city. The city has agreed to provide certain things to them, including constructing approximately 750 linear feet of a roadway connection, installing some concrete pipe, installing some gates, and some warning signs to help warn folks of the horses that are there. And those elements would be then specifically under the engineering department activity. We've also proposed, as the greenway is constructed, to include certain elements in that plan, including landscaping and berming between the trail and the paddock fence, irrigation using the city's reuse system, installation of a woven wire fence of adequate height to provide a barrier, no trespassing signs, and then some gates and parking. And then the same two ideas carry over, which is the need to construct both the Greenway Connector and Quarter Horse Drive to Cherry Lane and Siegel Park, and those will be improvements will be included in an upcoming CIP. The physical impact of this we're detailing here is estimated. The cost of the elements for Mary Miller Drive and signage would be $80,000, and we propose for those dollars to be paid for out of the operating budgets, future operating budgets of the engineering department and Parks and Recreation department. And then the concurrence, the Planning Commission has approved the master plan. They've approved the preliminary plat and zoning plans, and last night they also approved as a mandatory referral accepting the grant of land and easements from MTSU Miller Coliseum. So our recommendations from staff tonight are approve the memorandum of understanding between the city and MTSU Miller Coliseum, and authorize the city manager to execute that on behalf of the city. It also includes a recommendation to authorize the funding and the sources of funding as detailed in our agenda item. And then finally, we're asking that you authorize the mayor to execute any land and easement grants on behalf of the city to accommodate this project in the future. We'll be dedicating those rights-of-ways and easements in pieces as this project moves forward, and we're asking that you authorize the mayor to execute those on behalf of the city as those are prepared by the city attorney and approved by him. I'll be glad to answer any questions on this second part of the proposal.
Is there any time frame attached to this?
The time frame will be driven mostly, Mr. Shacklett, by our private development, Caroline Farms. That's really the trigger of all of this. They're itching to get started and really are in the last elements of their plans approval and permitting, and so I think they're ready to go within the next few weeks, subject to tying up these agreements and easements that will be needed for the construction of the roadway. The projected build-out of the Caroline Farms, we projected that at about 3 to 4 years based on information that the developer has provided and his expected uptake of lots. One of the things that's included in the road development agreement was if the city needs to move ahead quicker, the developer has agreed to provide easements and rights-of-way for that if for some reason we need to advance the road portion of this quicker than perhaps his schedule would allow.
I guess I was thinking about the Greenway extension part of this. Is that
the Greenway extension is proposed in years 3 and 4 of the update to the CIP. I'm looking at Mr. Crumley to confirm that that's that's the case, or Ms. Jackson from the Parks and Recreation Department. Our initial discussions were to track the timing of the Greenway connection to coincide with the construction of Quarter Horse Drive. Those appear to be good concurrent construction projects, probably one designer and probably one contractor. And that'll be a city-led project.
How long would you foresee, if you had language in there about it, giving the mayor the capability to
executing the final plats and easement documents?
That could be some
3 to 4 years is our projection right now, because that work will need to be done and those documents will need to be executed as the Caroline Farms property, the phasing of that goes through and is developed.
Is it any big deal to have that come back to council when that occurs?
It is not. It is not. It's merely the signature on a final plat document for the city of Murfreesboro. We will take title to the property. So we'll have title to a good bit of this property, and because of the road development agreement that we've executed with Caroline Farms, or proposed to execute, it will require that we participate in the final platting exercise of the Caroline Farms plats, and then some of that we will need to declare as public right-of-way because it's outside the boundaries of the platting exercise by Caroline Farms.
Just, can you give me a quick synopsis of the authority that I don't really exactly know?
What authority you're giving?
Yeah, I mean.
Well, the real estate transactions require the execution of an owner's representative who's authorized to sign on behalf of them. And so when we present a final plat and easement dedication documents to the registrar's office, we have to have a notarized owner's signature. It varies depending on whether it's an individual, a partnership, a corporation, a trust, to the level of ownership signatory authority. And so the mayor is the chief officer of the city of Murfreesboro, routinely signs those final plats on behalf of the city where the city property and city easements are involved in those transactions. And he's representing us in that situation as the owner.
I guess I'm thinking if it's 5 years down the road, it might be beyond his next term if that's, that whole thing. So
it would authorize this mayor or any future mayor to execute that on behalf of the city.
I would call this. I mean, if council authorizes this and approves the MOU, approves this transaction, then the execution of plats, the execution of an easement grant document, are essentially ministerial acts in the process, kind of like buying a load of rock to build the road with, and it's certainly possible to bring those back to council each time, but it usually is not necessary. Once a project is authorized, then we go ahead and take the administrative steps as they happen without further authorization.
It's kind of weird for me to be authorizing somebody to sign something maybe 5 years from now. We don't even know who it is. That feels a little weird. That's all.
It would be the position of the mayor as the chief officer of the city of Murfreesboro and the owner.
I move for approval.
Trying to kill me off?
Never can tell.
I know.
Second.
Motion is second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance. Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Pass. Consider recommendations of the Water Resources Board approve Smith Seckman Reed Engineering Task Order 1741 16.0 for the Northeast Regional Pump Station and Conveyance Design.
Mayor, City Council, thank you for the opportunity tonight to give you a brief summary of this project. We are asking for the approval of Smith Seckman Reed Task Order 1741-016 to design the Northeast Regional Pump Station. Do I look funny with these glasses on? And all the force main and conveyances along with that. There's also going to be abandonment of 3 large pump stations. Effectively, this regional pump station is going to take everything east of Memorial Drive and north of Northfield Boulevard and take it off the Sinking Creek interceptor. We have had a recurring overflow that has been, it's not considered chronic, but it's recurring, and this will alleviate the recurrency of that overflow. This is very similar to what we did with the Southwest Regional Pump Station that took a lot of flow off the Stones River interceptor. This has been in the works since 2011. I have a PowerPoint that I can go through and give a tutorial of everything that led to this point, but and I can go over the funding. We do have this money earmarked. We've got the money earmarked for the engineering services, and we do have in our 5-year CIP that we could fund this out of our reserve account or our savings account. There's always the option to go to get this into some debt or go get a loan to do this as well, but that's 3 or 4 years down the road. So right now we're just asking for approval for the engineering design, and those funds have been earmarked.
Move for approval. Second.
Second.
I was going to say, since you gave us the ability to opt out of the PowerPoint, I'm definitely moving for approval.
I'm learning. I'm learning. Thank you all very much.
We haven't voted yet.
Available for questions.
And
That's a mother's voice.
Madam, I do, wow. Hey, I do want to say that as soon as you said that, he did take off the glasses there, so.
Serious now.
All right.
I thought
Mr.
my
Wright,
son
you'll
was
call
here.
the roll.
Sorry.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gore. All right, we'll consider recommendations of the Assistant City Managers regarding a contract with Johnson and Bailey Architects for site planning on the city-owned property at Blaze Drive and Fortress Boulevard. Mr. Crumley.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We're asking you to approve a contract with Johnson and Bailey to do initial site planning on the 43 acres the city presently owns at Blaze and Fortress. I think I did a poor job of describing what this actually is in my letter, as I've heard the notion that we may be deciding in this plan whether we're going to build an aquatic center or another Patterson-like athletic center. That is not what this plan does. Knowing that the communications tower and the future location of Fire Station 11 is going to be on this site, what we feel like we needed was to look at what the size and massing, how traffic would flow of other future structures. That can be the aquatic center, that can be another recreation center, it could be something totally different. But the property, while 43 acres sounds like a great deal of property, this is actually, because of floodplain that goes through the property, a little more difficult than it seems. Johnson and Bailey has agreed to coordinate with currently Fire and Rescue and Parks and Recreation on looking at some of the needs that they have for their property now. They are also planning on doing the necessary soils and other types of preliminary investigations for whatever the future project would be that goes on the property. They've proposed a fee of $38,440 as a cap of an hourly rate. However, I failed to get it into my memo that they have also said no obligation on City Council, but in the future, if you choose them to be the designer of whatever structure goes on that property, that they would absorb 100% of this fee into their standard fees for design of a larger structure on the property. Be glad to try to answer any questions. Recommend approval.
Jim, I had some questions with this, talked to Rob about it, and, from a perspective of us paying $40,000 to do some master site planning on a site that we don't even really know what we're going to do other than with about 2 acres, which is the fire station. We know we want to put a fire station somewhere on here, whether it's an aquatic center or Patterson Park or both or a Frisbee golf course. It doesn't seem appropriate to me to spend $40,000 basically to tell us, hey, why don't you put the fire station at the corner? We saved $60,000 to not have an election, and we're talking about spending $40,000 on something we have no idea what's even going to do on the property, and we're about to run a parallel study with the Parks and Rec Department, to try to do a master plan. Why doesn't it make sense for us to spend the money on the master plan from a Parks and Rec perspective, let us discuss that, decide what we need to build, and then say, hey, can we do it here or on the Franklin Road site or at the West Park site? We seems like we have options instead of just spending $40,000 on this before we even know what we want to put on it other than 2 acres.
I think there's 2 really good reasons. Number one, the coordination on the site between, I think, what we've already decided is going there, the Fire Station 11, and whatever the future building that structures that we would put on the rest of the property. Knowing how the flow of traffic will move internally to that site, making sure we don't cause conflicts between what Fire and Rescue does and needs for their site and whatever the future use is. The second thing, and if we can flip to the monitor here, the site is not easy to design. The 43 acres runs approximately from the top of this screen through this wooded area till you can see the site on the ground where the communications tower presently is. If I flip to the other picture, it puts the floodplain on this property. And you can see that the property is encumbered by quite a bit of flood plain, not floodway. There's a significant chunk of real estate here on the north side that is not in the flood plain that would be of value to whatever future designing takes place. But figuring out how you could, what size of building can you fit on that site, with parking and traffic flow, how you get across that floodplain, and how you would use the north end of that site. We think that's a question that may be beyond the scope of what we can answer. It's not urgent, it's not pressing in terms of you've got to do this right now, but we're moving ahead as quickly as possible with Fire Station 11. We met again this morning on the design and plans for Fire Station 11.
Who's designing Fire Station 11?
That's Johnson and Bailey that have designed the prototype for our new fire stations, and Station 11 would be the first of that new standard, the new prototype. And that's pretty much why we selected Johnson and Bailey to look at the rest of the site, because they're already there preparing for putting the fire station on the ground.
So if they're already designing the fire station, and then we're obviously going to have to do the parking lot, the engineering that goes with that, this amount would go into that bucket?
Not the fire station. The future building that we would place on the balance of the property. What they've said in an email to us today was that we would agree that any of these fees paid on this site planning would be part of a standard fee for a future building on the property, but not Fire Station 11.
Is this property that looks to the south of the creek, is that the flood, what is it, is that flood plain? That's something you can't build in that?
This is floodplain that can be filled,
I can't
raised, and built upon. This is not floodway.
You got some that's got lines through it, and then you got some that looks to the farther to the south. What is that? The color? I don't know the color, obviously, but
Sam, Zone AE and Zone A.
yeah, the one that comes down the little fingers that kind of come down to the south.
Yes, Mr. LaLance, the candy striped area is floodway. It's generally off limits to development. There is just a little bit of a mapping error in there on the north side of that where the floodway is not properly depicted, but it does cover a good bit of the 43 acres as Mr. Crumley had described. The unstriped portion of that is floodplain. Less restrictive, more opportunities to place items in there, especially items like parking lots and greenways that if they get wet from time to time, it's not a huge deal. And then the lesser shaded area is what we call the 500-year floodplain. It's FEMA's projection of what a 500-year flood would inundate on that property. Floodways
Wetlands
off
credits
limits.
for this? We have some wetlands credits for this?
I'm not aware that there are wetlands or potential for wetlands here other than perhaps some minor riparian wetlands that would be a natural part of the stream. I don't think there are large quantities of wetlands on this property.
What is the area that's not in the floodway or the floodplain? How much ground are we talking about there?
On the south portion of the property,
Right.
there's approximately 20 acres. The northern corner, the northeast corner of the property that is outside of floodplain and floodway is about 7 or 8 acres.
The 7 or 8 acres is going to be, I mean, the 7 or 8 acres that that backs up to the storage facility, correct?
Could be a maintenance building, could be some other use. The property has got access from the neighboring subdivision, but I think you'd want to look at access from inside the development.
To get access to that piece of property from
Yes.
inside the development, you'd have
Yes.
to build a bridge, correct?
You're talking about some sort of structure.
Structure being a bridge.
Yes.
Okay. Potato, but.
You could tunnel
yeah.
under. You could.
Okay. I mean, I think the thing we're going to have to discuss also is looking at that 7 acre portion. I know that part of this, I think, was Mr. Olson, this was donated when the Smith family, is that right? When Fortress and Blaze was,
This was actually part of the three-school complex. The city provided, as I recall, $400,000 toward
Okay.
That campus, and in exchange for the city's funding of that, the city received this piece of ground.
okay. All right. I mean, I'm just looking, and I'm obviously not an engineer, but building a structure to get to that 7 to 8 acre piece of property is going to be extremely expensive.
Yes.
And I can't imagine that the maintenance shed or something like that would justify the cost, but it may could. But is that part of this?
That is part of Johnson and Bailey's proposal, is to look at that acreage on the north side and determine how it could best be used.
Would they give us estimates on how much they feel like that it would cost us to access that property, or what some of the other?
They're going to prepare full colored schematics of a site plan, and they would propose probably not what the structure would be used for as large, but more in terms of the size of the structure that could fit onto the real estate. Use would probably be for your determination.
Jim, the traffic flow obviously would be significantly different for a maintenance building than it would be for some type of park facility or recreational facility.
Yes.
How would you do a traffic study if you don't know what you're going to build?
I don't think there's a traffic study proposed here, Council.
A traffic.
They're talking about a massing study of how much building space you could actually get out of that site. Again, this is not the planning effort to determine what uses there would be for the property. It's really more to say this is how much real estate is available that can be used. And these are the types of sizes of buildings with parking and landscaping requirements that would fit on that property.
I think $40,000 is just too much for that. I think we could probably get a pretty doggone good idea with the professionals we have on staff back there. They could probably tell us real close, and then once we go through and save the money, put it towards the Parks and Rec master plan, come back around after we've kind of got that dialed in, and then, you know, start to put together pieces, because we have options. We have different pieces of property to go to here. If this piece works out to be too small for whatever that choice might be, whether it be Frisbee golf or a cross-country track or whatever, you know, I just think we could probably save that money and put it towards the Parks and Rec. So,
Council?
There's a lot of blue on that site. And I don't see access to the little piece back there, and I'm not sure it doesn't, I mean, it looks like we've got 20 acres to do something with. And the rest of it's, I don't know that there's much else we can do, and I'm not sure I can see that we need to spend the money to have us, I mean, you can just look at this and see that it's not, I mean, it's not going to be practical for us to access that other area for some type of development, and I'm not sure that money would be well spent. I'm tending to agree with Rick.
You know, I think the thing, Mr. Crumley, I would say too, I don't think there's any, you know, the talks have been about an aquatics facility, and I don't think that there's any doubt that at some point city needs one. I think the county realizes that. You know, the question is how we're going to pay for it. But so I don't think that anything on this, a vote for or against, would be for or against an aquatic center. I think it would also be mainly, if we don't do it, saving money to be able to put that maybe towards the design. But the question I've got for you, do we already have a pretty rough idea, Chief, where the where the fire station is going to go?
Yes, we do.
Are we going to go on the opposite side of the tower closest to Blackman?
We would be on what I consider the southwest corner between the tower and Blaze Drive.
Okay. So, I mean, I understand the concept of bringing this to try to master plan that, but if we already know where the fire station is going to go, we know what our ingress and egress on the fire station are already going to be, then, you know, to me, that's the most important thing right now is we need to get the fire station built for 11 and get it out in the Blackman area. But we're going to know what land that we have left over. And as, you know, we're going through the engineering and design process on the station, I think that's a really good opportunity for us to assess what we have left and see how much that we can carve out to be able to build, you know, if it's a recreational center, our next recreational center. So,
So just
Jim, would you like to withdraw this request, or do you want me to make a motion?
It doesn't matter. I understand.
okay. I think
Consider it withdrawn.
Yeah, I think. All right. Thank you, Mr. Crumley. Thank you.
thanks.
Item number 2, we have a refunding resolution for Thompson Lane. The state requires on the widening of Thompson Lane that the city contribute for the right-of-way acquisition. Our share currently due with TDOT is $1.2 million. Even though we're talking about having the capital improvement plan in front of you all in the next 2 weeks, we think we need to move ahead with this reimbursement resolution in order to not slow down or hold up TDOT in the planning for widening Thompson Lane. We'd recommend Resolution 17R21.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion and second. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Mr. Crumley, thank you very much. All right, so we've already considered for adoption Resolution 17R21, so that's already passed. All right, consider recommendations of the city manager regarding the class and comp plan correction.
Mayor, members of City Council, we recently discovered an unintended consequence in our compensation plan. Since we did not move the pay ranges in this year's budget, this was brought to our attention. Our compensation plan includes a minimum and a maximum pay for all positions for each grade from grade 101 to 139. I've got a 2-slide PowerPoint I think will explain the situation.
Mr. Gore, if you wouldn't mind coming up and working the PowerPoint for him, that'd be great.
So this is just one example. It exists for the rest of the plan. For instance, in grade 108, we have a GIS operator. GIS operator works 37 and a half hours a week, or 1,950 hours per year. The plant manager works 40 hours per week, or 2,080 hours per year. However, our current compensation plan doesn't take into account the 2 different work schedules. So as you can see highlighted in the green, the maximum salary for those two positions would be $43,704.96. Now, if you go over and look at the column that says hourly rate, you can see that the GIS operator would have the ability to earn $22.41, yet the plant manager, because they work more hours, has to have a lower hourly rate to get to that same maximum. So there's a $1.40 hour per difference. It's just not fair. And so our recommendation to you is to correct it where they would both have the ability to make that $22.41. And because the plant manager works 130 more hours per year, they would have a maximum of $46,618.62. Attached in your my staff letter is the table that lists the minimum and maximum for all positions, both at the 37.5 hour per week schedule as well as the 40 hour per week schedule. Be happy to answer any questions, but I do recommend your approval. We would make this retroactive to July 1.
Definitely an unintended consequence, and I move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright?
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Hey, I want to say thanks for putting this stuff together for us. The presentation was good as far as our reading material, and to be able to recognize, hey, we got an unintended consequence, and going back and fixing it is good stuff. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, you have several beer permits. Ms. Wright?
We do. We have a special event permit for the Murfreesboro Young Professionals that will be happening on August 26th in the downtown area. They're going to be blocking off South Walnut Street between the alley and First Vision Bank. This application is in order, and if you approve it tonight, we will issue that one tomorrow. We have a restaurant that is having an ownership change at 2615 Medical Center Parkway, Suite 2395. This application has met the background inspection requirements. We are waiting for them to finish their building codes inspections. When that one passes, we would be able to issue that permit if you approve it tonight. We have a new location for a beer permit at 149 Windlewood Drive, B5, for our new restaurant. That application has met the building code, has met the background check inspections, but not the building codes inspections just yet. So if you approve it tonight, we will issue that permit once they have completed their inspections. Finally, we have a new restaurant coming in at 1831 Northwest Broad Street. It's an ownership and name change. They have had beer in that location before under other ownership. We would recommend approval of this one as well. Once they pass their building codes inspections, their background inspection has come back for approval. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer those.
Questions, I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, if you call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Any statements to be paid?
Yes, Mayor, we have two on the list tonight that were laid out earlier.
I move we pay the bills.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, if you call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Other business from staff or city council. We have one item. I want to preface before Mr. Lyons has given us a memo in an effort not to throw Mr. Lyons under the bus. A couple of weeks ago, I reached out to representatives of the owner of the property. I think that we all was deferred before us, and in the course of those conversations, we came to sort of this agreement, but really I wanted to give you all the rationale after meeting with staff. It would just so happen we were talking about the major thoroughfare plan, and so, timing is everything, but we talked about with Cherry Lane that there's going to be significant wetlands mitigation. That's already gone through a public process. That's already gone through an engineering process. That's already gone through the entire process of meeting with owners of the property, letting them know where the road's going to be. So with that, the city is going to have to mitigate wetlands. And we met tonight on a major thoroughfare plan with 29 projects that got pushed, another 35 that are being put on the books. And so we've got 64 road projects that at some point we're going to hit other things. So with that, again, met with staff. We talked about wetlands mitigation, major thoroughfare plan. We talked about water quality and what the goal of our original implementation in 2008 of our stormwater management. Part of that was specifically protecting water quality on Sinking Creek. And then we talked about trails. So, and even meeting with the developer of the old Hastings building on how to get a trail system to that area. So I want, before Mr. Lyons presents this, we all read on social media. That's the way people contact us nowadays. But I don't think that under any circumstances is the city actively going out and looking to get into the real estate business. In the last 3 or 4 years, we've purchased the McDonald property. And that was based upon council sitting here saying we don't like any of the options that we have on our West Park, so let's go find more property. And that opened up what I think is probably the absolute best piece of property that we could have gotten on the west side of town. We purchased the Franklin Synergy project, which we met on last week, that I think 10 years from now will be one of the most dynamic things that has happened to the downtown area. And then we purchased a piece of property on Highway 96 for a future school site, a future fire site, and a future park site. So, we're not in the game of going out and seeking to purchase property, but sometimes unique opportunities come up. And with that, Mr. Lyons, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. We're recommending for your approval tonight the acquisition of 11.7 acres on property that fronts both North Highland and East Clark Boulevard. The purchase price would be $300,000. I know you're familiar with the location of this, but it's interesting to step back and look at the amount of land the city already holds in this area. We just are finishing the development of the police headquarters, Evergreen Cemetery, Oakland's Mansion, Oakland's Park, and then there's a vacant 7-acre parcel that's next to the piece of property under consideration this evening. The contract that's before you has a proposed closing date of September the 29th. And as the mayor alluded to, we're going to need to acquire wetlands based on some of the road projects that we've got coming in our future. This parcel includes about 5 to 8 acres of wetlands. We estimate just from the Cherry Lane project alone, we could have 10 to 50 acres that will need to be acquired. This will count toward that. So the dollars invested and spent on this proposed contract will be dollars we would have had to have spent anyway for wetlands property. At this point, we don't have necessarily immediate plans to make improvements to the property, but we would continue to protect it as a natural area. At some point in the future, we can look to see if there's some walking trails and some interpretive trailheads that can be included. So we would recommend your approval of the project. The funding would come $100,000 from the Stormwater Fund and then $200 from a future bond proceeds. We need to do a refunding resolution before the closing would occur in September. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
This property would be used as credits rather than mitigation, wouldn't it?
Yes, sir.
I have comment.
Well, I'll just go ahead and say thanks to Sam. I had some questions about why we'd be building undevelopable or buying undevelopable land for whatever it is, close to $30,000 an acre. And Sam was kind enough to spend an hour with me on the phone this past week instead of spending an hour at the podium with us tonight. So got my questions answered, and I feel definitely comfortable that it's the right thing to do. So you got
Ms. Scales Harris.
With our city growing as fast as it is, supposedly over 250 people are moving here a month, and by us known nationally as being the 10th fastest growing city, we are definitely experiencing a lot of growing pains in areas that are almost uncomfortable, such as our traffic situation, our schools, and living quarters, and so on. I am now in my mid-60s, and I can remember driving in Murfreesboro, seeing the beautiful countrysides, seeing beautiful fields and beautiful farmland, but with our growth, all of these things seem to be rapidly, to me, disappearing. And I feel that it's very important that we preserve things such as our wetlands, not only for nature and for beauty, but for our kids to experience the beauty and see what nature is at its best. So I think this is something great to do. And if we have no other comments, I move for approval.
Second.
Motion second. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right. Any other business? Any other business? Thank y'all. All right. With that, we'll stand adjourned.